Hey there, I am Pascal, also known as Obvious Dev, and I'm going to show you an easy way to do really cool scene transitions like this one in Unity with Unity Shader Graph. We will build the shader together, and then I'll show you how to create some of these gradient textures you can then feed into the shader to make the transitions working. If you like this tutorial, please subscribe to this channel and maybe check out my LAKEY devlogs, where I'm telling you more about the game I'm currently developing. Enough of the intro, let's build some cool scene transitions. Before we start to build the shader in Shader Graph, I just want to give you a quick overview over the project and everything I prepared. So, what do we have in our project? We have two scenes, scene 1 and scene 2. They just have different backgrounds so that we then can transition from one scene to another with our cool transition effect. In our first scene, scene 1, there's our main camera game object, and under it there's a transition game object. It has a sprite renderer component on it. I can just activate it, and like you can see here, there's just a black background sprite on the sprite renderer component. On this sprite we will then apply our transition shader. I also prepared a transition texture. Like I said, I will later show you how you can create these by yourself using Aseprite or Photoshop. And yeah, what's also really important, before we can create a shader that we then can edit with Shader Graph, we have to make sure that Universal Render Pipeline is activated. I'm pretty sure it also works with HD Render Pipeline, but at least one of these pipelines has to be imported to our project. So let's just create our shader. I prepared a folder called Shader, then we go to Create, Shader, and since we have Universal Render Pipeline activated in our project, we have these shaders to choose from. So we go to 2D renderer, and then we need sprite unlit graph. Click. I will just call it transition shader. Perfect. So now there's transition shader. We highlight it, and then we'll just click on open, and bam, here is our shader graph. So let me just make this full screen. Bam. Let me just put this here. This is our master node. This is the end node where we then can, which defines what's actually the final output of the shader. So what do we do first? Let's start with creating a texture 2D, and this is going to be our main texture. This is the texture on which we will then apply the shader. So like in my example, I showed you before the black background texture. I'll call this main texture. And what's now important is in the reference field, you have to enter underscore main text in upper camel case. So this is important because the sprite renderer component will check for this property in the material to decide what texture it's supposed to show. And to use this property in our shader, we then have to create a node and texture, sample texture 2D. So here we go. Then we'll just put our property, put it into the graph, and now we can just click here and put our main texture into sample texture 2D. Now let's choose the texture. Here we have the black background. Click it, and I mean, it's just a black background, but you can see here, yeah, it's there. So in the next step, let's just change our main preview from square to quad, because we work on 2D. That's, yeah, just easier to see our result in the end. Next step, we already have our main texture in the graph, but we also need our transition texture. So just add another texture 2D property, call it transition texture. And here we can choose what we want to call the reference. Let's just call it transition texture. And when we want to access this property from script, that's actually the name of the property. So like we did it before, we add just another sample texture 2D, put it below our main texture sample texture node, then put transition texture here. Just link these two, and bam, now we have our two textures. That's nice. So now let's pick the transition texture I prepared. Here we go. So we can see it here. And now the next thing that we need is a combine node, because in some way we want to combine these two textures together, and we can do this with a combine node. And what's important for later is that we just want to control the alpha value with our transition texture, and the color of the texture that we will then use to transition, we will use the colors from our main texture. So what we can do now is just put our RGB values from the sample texture to the combine node. Bam. And then we can use the combine node already to link it with our master node. So now we can see nothing because we have alpha 0. If I change this to 1, we would see 100% of the RGB values are shown. 0.5, yeah, it's just 0.5 alpha value. I will leave it at 0 for now because we will, yeah, link this to there, our transition texture to the combine node, but not now. So the next node we need is a branch node and also a comparison node. Let me just add these. I will explain what they will do in a second. Let's just make some room. Comparison here. Branch here. Perfect. So what do we want to achieve with these two extra nodes? What we want is, we want to compare every pixel in our transition texture has a red, green and a blue value. Since it's black and white, they are all the same for every pixel, but they go from 0, which would be black, 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 to 1, which would be white, white, white in the middle. So we want to compare this to our cutoff value. The cutoff value is the actual progress of the transition. So it's 0 when we start, and it's 1 when we have finished the transition. So for now, we'll just put our red value to the first comparison input. We could actually use green or blue, it wouldn't make a difference. Since we have our red value in the comparison node, we also need our actual progress that we will then change via script. So let's just create another property, vector1, which is just a float value. Let's call it cutoff, pop, reference underscore cutoff. And then let's change the mode to slider. Default 0, that's the current value. And then we have a min value and a max value. Min is 0, max is 1. That's perfect. Now let's put the cutoff value onto our shader graph and then link this to the comparison node. And what we want to do now is, like I said before, we want to compare every pixel in the transition texture with the actual cutoff value, which is also the progress. To achieve that, we don't want to find out if these values are equal. We want to find out if the color value of the transition texture is less than the actual progress, because if it's less, we want to show this part of the transition texture, or let's say we want to show this part of the transition texture on our main texture. So now let's put the output of the comparison into the input of the branch node. Like I said before, we want to compare, and if, for example, let's say if the left part here, this goes from color value 0 to 0.1. If this is less than our current progress, we want the branch node to output the true value 1 to our alpha channel, which will then be the input for our combined alpha value. So then now I can show you that it works. I will now just change the current value to 0.1. Bam. And now we see that this part on the left and on the right, which is the gradient from 0 to 0.1, is now less than our current progress. So for these pixels, the branch node will put out the value 1, because this is the input value for the true input node of the branch node. Then we will combine this with the RGB value, the colors of our main texture. Now in the preview, you can see the left vertical column and the most right vertical column is now visible. So let's just play around with this a bit. Let's say 0.05. So this is just, yeah, the bottom half of both columns. And let's just say 0.5. This is, yeah, 50% of the transition is done. And for one, every color value is less than our current progress, so that we will then have everything shown from our main texture. I'm sorry, I yeah, quite new to do these tutorials, so my explanations may yeah, maybe I'm not the best. So great, that's our shader. That's everything we need. It's pretty much working. Cool. That was quite easy. So let's just yeah, clean it up a bit so that it looks nice and tidy. Doesn't this look nice? Great. So that's our shader. Let's just click Save Asset. Pop, and back to the project. So now that our transition shader is finished, we will just create a new material. So I go to my folder Materials, click right click, create material. Let's call this transition material. Now this material just have to use the correct shader. So to find the shader that we created with Shader Graph, there is a listing here called Shader Graphs. We click there, and there's our transition shader. Awesome. And here we have our slider, which goes from 0 to 1. Now here we can also see that the shader is working, but I can also change the preview from sphere to quad. So nice. So now we go back to our transition game object. I will activate it. And now I will change the material on the sprite whenever component with our transition material. Pop, pop. And now the sprite is no longer visible. Go back to our transition texture. No, go back to material, transition material. Now, if I change the cutoff value, yay, we have a transition. That's cool. That's awesome. Yay, transition. Great. The next step is that I will just show you how you can use this transition material from script, so that we then just can yeah, make the transition work in our game. Okay, cool. So let's just create a C# script, call it transition controller. Bam. Hit up Visual Studio. And here we are. Yeah, I will just now create a really basic script. You can do it with a tween library, within coroutine, whatever you want. I will just, yeah, start a time lapse and we will see us in a second. So now I just built a really simple script. It's really not fancy, and I would totally recommend to use coroutine or a tween library. All I'm doing is now that here in our Moni behavior, we have our sprite renderer component, so that we then here can access our material and set a float value, which will be the cutoff property of our shader. And then we'll just calculate a transition progress. This starts at 0, and then I will just add the current delta time and multiply it by our transition speed, so that we then configure how fast we want our transition to happen. And I will just, yeah, hit off the transition with my spacebar. And after the transition is finished, so when the transition progress reaches 1 or, yeah, it's more than 1, then we will just use the scene manager to load our second scene. So let's just see if this is actually working. Let's go back to the project. And now we go to our transition game object, scripts, and let's just put the transition controller component to it. So we need to reference the sprite renderer, and then we can configure the speed. For now, I will just leave it at 1. So our transition should be exactly 1 second long. Game has started. Let's hit spacebar. Bam! Nice. Transition totally working. Amazing. So just another example. Let's just change the speed to 0.1. So now we should see a 10-second transition, hopefully. Bam. Nice and slowly. I like it. A lot, actually. Great. So, that's all we need in Unity to create some cool 2D transitions. And now I would just want to, give you a quick tutorial into how to create these magic transition textures, so that you then can create, some cool gradient textures which would give you then totally different transitions, like for example this one. So here we are in Aseprite. Just a quick disclaimer, I use Aseprite because I believe it's the best tool for 2D pixel art artists, and it's quite accessible because it's not that expensive, but you could totally pull this off with any other 2D graphic tool like Photoshop or GIMP, so choose whatever you have. And okay, so here's a new sprite. The resolution is 480 pixels times 270, so that's 60:9, like our aspect ratio of my camera in the game, so that's important. And then I changed the grid settings to 48 times 48, so that now I have 10 columns, 10 vertical columns here that I can work with, because what I want to do is to create a transition texture that's almost like the one I prepared for the first part of the tutorial, but this time I don't want to have 20 columns, I just want to have 10 columns, so the transition will just go from left to right. Yes, exactly. Oh no, it will go from right to left, but I don't know, I could mirror the texture later and then it goes the other way, or change it in the shader actually. Okay. What's also important is that if you want to achieve a transition that is with a consistent speed, like let me show you here, you see that over the whole progression of the transition, the speed doesn't really change, it's the same. And that's achieved by having a gradient that's 100% evenly spread out. So to achieve that, what I did is I created here this part of my color palette. This goes just from plain white to full black, and I decreased the brightness by 10% from 100%, so that I then just go down in 10% steps, if that makes sense, to from FFFFFF to 0,000,000. So here you can see, let me just show you what I mean. Here's the HSV, hue saturation, and the value, and we'll start at 0,0,100, and then let's go to the next one, and this is 0,0,90, and in the end we reach 0,0,0. And now, since I have these 11 different colors going from 100 to 0, I have now 10 pairs of different colors, so 10 possible gradients I can then spread out on my sprite, and that's actually great because I have 10 columns, so that's perfect. And yeah, there's a reason I did it this way. So let's just start by creating the first gradient. I picked the first color as a primary color, and then the second one as a secondary. I hit Shift G, or we can just go here, gradient tool, shortcut Shift G, and we will start on the left. And what's now important is that you not start from here, from the top pixel line, you start above it. So you start here, click left mouse button, zoom out, then go to the bottom, and now you don't go to this one, you go to the bottom line pixel. And what I also do is that I now hit Shift, because if I hit Shift, the gradient will become horizontal. Hit Shift, release mouse, release Shift, and now we go here. I just want to show you something. Exactly. So if I choose the brightest color here in the top line, it's actually not FFFFFF, it's FE. So that's important, because if we want to create the second column, let me just do that. We'll put this here, and then I will just do the same with the second and the third color. Shift G, go here, go down here, click Shift. Now I have to, because it's again the whole sprite. I just have to click V, then click, press Shift, and then just move it to the right, so that we then have here our first column. This will be our second column. And what I showed you before, it's important that this color or this color is not exactly this color. So this color here is E6, 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 and this color here is E5, E5, E5. So that when we at the point at the I'm sorry. When we then are at the transition point 1, let me just show you again. Point 1, we don't want to have this line shown and in the exact same moment having this line shown. So we don't want that. That would make this part of the transition faster. And yeah, it's not good. So that's why we start here and not here. I hope that was clear. If there are any more questions and if I don't explain anything very good, then please just drop me a comment and I will just try to elaborate on that so that there are no misunderstandings. Sorry, my voice is a bit messed up. So I will now just jump into time-lapse mode and yeah, finish the texture. So see you in a second. And here we are. I already saved this into the project and applied my import settings to it. So let's just give it a try. We will go to our transition material and then we will just change the transition texture to 10 columns. Click. And now, bam, it's working. Awesome. So yeah, that's really great. And I mean, you can go full creative with this. You can create whatever kind of gradient you want to create. So maybe let's just, for the fun of it, let's just say, wait, what's our canvas size? 270. Let me change the grid settings. 270 divided by 2 is 135. And now we just flatten this. This here, then copy this, take this down here, and let's just mirror this. Now I'm nervous and I don't find it. Here, flip horizontal, bam, let's save it. Okay, save it. Nah, I just overwrite it, doesn't matter. It's just for yeah, tutorial purposes anyway. And bam, now this is our transition texture, and that's not what I expected, to be honest, and I know why. That was stupid. Let's do it again, but correct. So what we want to do is we want to transform it so that we have the full gradient still on it, but just not stretched, but the opposite of stretched. And then put this here, flip it again, save it, and now, yes, we have this cool effect. And maybe if we, now I'm just playing around, so I mean, the tutorial part is mostly over. I just want to have some fun. Let's flip this vertically. What can we do now? Yes, that's what I thought. That's pretty cool, actually. Nice. That's a cool transition. And it's super easy. So we can just play around with it and have a lot of fun. And let's start it again. Maximize on play. Hit spacebar. Oh, still have the 10 seconds in, but I mean, now you can see it in a slow motion kind of way. That's also pretty nice. Ta-da! Second scene. Awesome. I mean, what would be even cooler, I believe, is if now the second scene would start with a transition from the other side. So it starts full black and then another transition opens the new scene, if you know what I mean. I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. But I believe that's it. I showed you everything I wanted to show you, and I hope you had fun with this small little tutorial on transition shader in Unity's shader graph. And if so, if you had fun, I would really appreciate it if you would give my other videos a try. I make a devlog series on a game called like Misfit, from where I actually stole this images here you can see here. And yeah, maybe consider to subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, that would really help me a lot. And you can also join the Discord server, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. You will find all the necessary links for that. Oh my god, you will find all the necessary links for that in the description. And so that's everything from me, and thank you for watching, and bye bye.